Hello, everyone. Welcome to Embracing Our Potential for Transformation in the studio with Summer Blake. I'm Lisa Martin with Silver Spring Town Center, and so happy to have you joining us for this wonderful exploration of Summer's beautiful work. She'll tell us more about it. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we are recording this because many people ask to see recording afterward. And also, we have some other events coming up. As you know, Silver Spring Town Center is a nonprofit based in the Silver Spring Civic Building, and we present over 100 events throughout the year, arts and entertainment events. Including the Silver Spring Blues Festival and our upcoming 9th annual Harvest Moon Festival taking place Sunday, September 25th from 1 to 7 on Veterans Plaza. So mark your calendars. We're about to announce our lineup. We have some exciting entertainment lined up as well as hands-on arts activities. So that will be a great thing. This month, we are also celebrating the whole idea of travel. Oh, the places you will go. The Dr. Seuss book was the inspiration for this month's programming. We had a wonderful virtual art exhibition hosted by artist Marcy Wolf Hubbard, and it's featured in our newsletter. It's a short video of all the artwork that was submitted and exhibited in this virtual presentation from artists of all abilities throughout our community. We also have another travel logs program coming up. I host that, and we are doing that as a happy hour on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. And so bring your travel photos. It will be in person at El Golfo on the patio at 5 o'clock. And then stick around because we have our Wonderful Wednesdays series. We have some youth jazz musicians performing that evening. Our Twilight Tuesdays has been hopping on Veterans Plaza we have salsa every first and third Wednesday. And Tuesday. This Tuesday, we have All Out Danza. Victor Masonette is a wonderful choreographer, really puts on a great party. So come and dance with us this Tuesday, 7 to 9 p.m. at Twilight Tuesdays on Veterans Plaza. SSTCI is also celebrating our summer potluck picnic at the Coiner Farm on Sunday, the 21st of August from 4 to 7. We invite you to join us. We will also have a special program that day. It will be a Follow Your Bliss panel discussion with an array of interesting folks featured, including one of our board member, Madeline Caliendo, who's here, and an artist herself, and some other really interesting and inspiring folks from the community. So join us Sunday, the 21st at the Coiner Farm. That's an urban farm in downtown Silver Spring. All of our events are made possible with generous support from Montgomery County, United Therapeutics, the Arts and Humanities of Montgomery County, Maryland State Arts, Montgomery College, and many others. And now let's get to what you've been waiting for. Summer Blake, her, is a visionary artist based in Baltimore, Maryland. Through her intricate mandalas, she invites her audience to embark on an introspective exploration into the mysteries of consciousness. Each piece presents a unique narrative or focus, drawing on a variety of spiritual and cultural traditions, archetypal symbols and universal patterns such as sacred geometry to offer insights into the nature of existence. Her creative process is an active surrender of releasing what no longer serves in order to open to what the present moment has to offer. Each fully realized piece narrates the cyclical human journey from doubt and fear into trusting the process and trusting oneself. Summer Blake is a self-taught artist Her use of bold color and striking imagery create a dynamic punch of energy, which pulls the viewer in to explore the complexity and the fine detail contained within her work. Summer's main inspiration derives from challenging experiences in her own life, which have taught her the value of authentic self-expression and propelled her forward toward unconditional self-acceptance. Through the intricacy and complexity of her art, she encourages viewers to look closely, reflect deeply, and ground into the present moment. Through the meditative experience, we can intuitively move toward greater self-awareness, connecting more deeply to who we really are. Summer is passionate about the importance of self-expression and finding one's joy. A longtime Maryland resident, Summer facilitates women's circles, teaches local workshops. I hope to invite her to teach a workshop soon for us as well. Teaches local workshops on creative expression and creates out of her home studio in West Baltimore. During the summer months, she travels the East Coast as a live artist, gallerist, and workshop facilitator. Welcome, Summer Blake. So happy to have you. And
thank you.
And we were talking, you said you were open to questions along the way as you're presenting.
Yes. I feel that that's appropriate for the flow of this talk. So I'll just give a gentle reminder that overall, when the presentation is occurring, please make sure you have your microphone muted just for the enjoyment of all. And when you are asking questions, just so we can kind of respect the time constraints, make sure that you keep your questions succinct, so we can keep moving on with the flow of the conversation. But thank you all so much for your interest, and thank you so much for showing up tonight. I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here and getting to talk about the things that I'm so passionate about. So I guess, Lisa, if you're ready, I guess I'll start talking about my art and my process and all those good things.
Take it away, Summer.
Wonderful. All right. Well, hello again, everyone. I'm Summer Blake. I think that goes without saying at this point. But the topic or the title of this particular presentation is embracing our potential for transformation. And this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, because it forms really the core of why I create art and what it signifies to me. So what I'm going to do today is, this is a studio tour, and it's also kind of a tour through my experience as an artist and what I want to bring out of it to share with the people who witness it. So I guess we'll just get started in that way. I'll begin by kind of talking a little bit about myself, as well as what built up to my current identity as an artist. And then we can move on and talk about just how I create, as well as really the significance of the pieces to me. And of course, I always welcome everyone else's experience. And I'm just curious to hear and see where things go. So let's get started. So I'm gonna share my screen for a moment. So I'm gonna start just by talking about myself a little bit. I identify as a visionary artist, specializing in the mandala as a tool for personal transformation, sort of also as an archetypal means of really connecting and going deeper within. Just the idea of self-examination and expansion of awareness is very important to me, and that the tendency and the ability of mandala creating to really focus the mind and become so present in the present moment is one that fills me with so much enjoyment. It's very hard to put what visionary artist signifies into words. But essentially for me, it's kind of about creating that bridge between spirit and matter, that there's the world that we experience, and also there's the world, the world stretches out infinitely from what I've lived of it. And the visionary artist is the one that bridges that gap, and often even visions into being new ways of perceiving and experiencing life. So it's really a joy to be able to create art that speaks to that mission and that motive. So moving forward, I'm going to talk about my journey. Let me switch back here for a second. And let me see, it looks like somebody just got in. Perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey as a human being, my journey into becoming an artist, because really my life story is obviously tied into how I create and why I create. So it's always hard to kind of start the story of one's life. But I think one of the hallmarks of my young self is that, I really, have always been a highly sensitive person. And what that means for me, it often in the past has been that life can be exceedingly overwhelming often because, I feel very deeply. I introspect very deeply as well. Sometimes, overthinking can become incredibly overwhelming. But, just like all of us, we're kind of born into the world and aren't necessarily always taught, healthy coping mechanisms. And, we can struggle with mood disorders, with mental health, things like that. For me, that often tended to manifest in periods, like very extended periods of deep depression, starting in adolescence. There's a sense of really being profoundly disconnected from the world, which also deepened into an experience of disconnection from my own self, particularly with respect to my body. And so there was something that was fundamentally lost to me, but the only experience that I was really able to discern was that I was lost, and I didn't really know why I felt the way that I did. And as time passed, that really just only continued to deepen. And so for me, that experience really hit a peak in my early 20s, which was occurred at a time that I also was struggling with a very severe eating disorder, really also as a result of this feeling of disconnection with the body. Something that I think our culture teaches us is that the body and mind are separate, and often also that the body is a tool or a vehicle, but one that is simply there in service to the mind. And so, that process of separation for me was deeply abusive, and again, kind of took me away from my ability to connect with the world, because in a lot of ways I was really seeking to escape the feeling of overwhelmingness of the life experiences that I was having. And so, during that time, kind of struggling with the things that I was, there emerged in me a very deeply based desire to self-express. Because there were so many ways in which I was actively really suppressing myself and who I truly was. And so because of that, at the time I was a writer. I really, I wrote an abundance of poetry. I just really journaled, and felt that my identity was wrapped in that. But there was also a feeling that words could not fully describe the experiences that I was having. And so I turned to the visual arts to find that, or to fulfill that need for expression. And so, art began to emerge as a means to really connect to an authentic part of myself that was very much unable to be seen and not allowed to be seen. So that was sort of the beginning of the process of me beginning to experience art as something that was a tool for some degree of liberation, but there was still a great deal of struggle that was happening for me, and kind of a feeling of just not really believing that there was a way out. So in my late 20s, I had an experience that I can only describe as a spiritual awakening. And the experience itself, was not anything flashy, or, there's no way to describe it, to put into words that's comparable. But for me, the significance of this experience was that it really began to open a door for me. Whereas before, I had sort of been standing at a window, looking out, but having this very sort of like closeted and bracketed in view of existence. And so this widening of this door just continued to happen for me, such that I really, for the first time in a very long time in my life, began to really grasp again at the wonder of life and the wonder of being alive and experiencing existence and experiencing whatever this strange thing is that we all share in our own way. And that really started to endow me with a feeling of hopefulness, really for the first time in my adult life. And so that really was the beautiful awakening that began to transition my art away from simply, a way to release, stagnant energy that really needed to be released, into a vessel to achieve greater liberation from the things that I struggled with. And so, around that time, I really started to work more deeply with the mandala, which in cultures across the world has been utilized as a tool for self-exploration and transformation. And so my pieces began to take on what was very often an unconscious and intuitive process, but one that also enabled me to really sit with myself and take the time to be present, rather than what had been a very long lasting tendency to really hide from the world and hide from things that frightened me. So kind of skip forward a few years into the future, and my processes continue to deepen. I am so thrilled to see the direction that my art is taking, and it's also a personal joy to witness the transformation that's happened in my own life into becoming more deeply connected with myself, more deeply connected with the world, and open to experiencing life, and really more capable of sharing and resonating, and just kind of having a participatory experience with life and others. And so it's in my great joy to be able to share that journey through my art with others, and really in the hopes that art will serve as a reminder of the capacity in each one of us, for that potential for transformation and liberation from often the tendency to not allow ourselves to be who we really are. So yes, that's just a little bit of an intro. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back to the screen. I'm going to share my screen real quick again. And I'm going to take us back to, hang on 1 second. Okay, I might have done this wrong again. Thank you all for your patience. Okay, well, it's not necessary. What I'm going to talk about next is actually a little bit more of the technical details of how I create. So I'm sure at least some of you have seen my work prior to coming to this presentation. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail of how I make what I make. So I've got a piece that I'm working on right now, just to give you an idea of the size of scale. So this is a self-portrait actually that I've been working on recently. And I tend to create on the smaller scale. This is a 16 by 16 inch piece of watercolor paper. And essentially, what usually prompts the beginning of the process is that I start with a concept. And the concept usually is a figure, or there's a particular topic that I'm drawn to, something that really speaks to me. Something that forms sort of that central hub from which the work of art emerges. And that really is, for me, working, often in the form of the mandala. There's sort of the central portal or center, almost like a flower, where the bud forms and the flower begins to, open. And so for me, one of the hallmarks of, I guess, how I categorize the processes within my work is that it's really the combination of two things. It's the combination of the intuitive part of the process and the structure that forms the eventual form itself. So, there's the technique, and there's also the releasing and letting go of the illusion of control, and letting some aspect of the self or something beyond the self kind of take over. So generally I do start with something that is speaking to me in the moment, and I begin to build around it. And that process really unfolds very intuitively, while at the same time incorporating a variety of structural elements that, tend to possess repetitive, aspects or things that may be symmetrical in nature. So it's kind of the fusion of these things that come together to form the art itself. So, with this piece and with all of the other works that I create, I am very obviously a big fan of precision. So for that reason, I think it's always been pens rather than paint that has spoken to me. Even though as my journey progresses, there's so much enjoyment in playing and learning the varieties of form that we can create with. So at the present moment, my instruments of choice are microns, which are generally like black ink pens. And I also work with a variety of pens by Faber-Castell. So they're archival pens. So the color, fadability is much less than when you're working with a cheaper set of pens. And the wonderful thing about these two is that they're felt tipped. So you have a very fine point, and you can get that precision that you're looking for. And which is, invaluable to a lot of the type of work that I do. The other aspect of my work, my work process is really getting the precision into alignment. And so I do some planning, in the beginning. There's a lot of time spent kind of blocking out areas of my piece, using things like compass and a protractor. So these are really necessities for creating the symmetry that is inherent to my work. But so what I'll usually do is I'll start by kind of marking the paper with a series of circles and kind of angular delineations. And I'll use that to build the structure of my piece, and then continue to create using that as kind of my map. So what I'm going to do next is share one of my videos on YouTube that shows kind of the coloring process itself, because this really is such a methodical experience, and yet there's also kind of the joy of seeing where it goes, because one of the things that I enjoy about the creative process is that distinction or that delineation of structure and intuition. So even though there's a great precision to applying the color, there's also just you know, that joyfulness of getting to choose the colors. And, you know, I don't use a logical structure to make that determination. It's really just feeling very deeply into what colors are right in that moment, and kind of like going with that current. So let's see if I can get my technology to work for me this time. Okay. Lisa, can you see this here? Let me know if this is viewable.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. So this is a time elapse of a piece of mine that I worked on.
It's not showing yet.
Oh, it's not
so-
showing up.
No, it flashed on the screen, but and my own screen seemed to be freezing.
Okay.
So just in case I fall out.
Here
But
we go. Okay.
I do have your PowerPoint too, if you need me to show it. Okay, it's coming up.
Perfect.
I can see it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I figured out what I did wrong before.
Stuck.
Always a relief. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. So here's the time elapse, just showing you kind of the very slow and steady creation process of really doing this very precision-based outlining. I really love the pen so much because the spectrum that they exist in is just brings such joy to my heart. Like I love the colors and there we go. So it was briefer than I expected, but actually let me pull out the second part of that video real quick. See if YouTube mocks me. Oh, good, no ads. All right. So really the process itself is just, you know, very slow and steady layering. It's really just filling in all of those pieces and letting that flow into, you know, where it needs to go. But for me, it's just such a joy. This, you know, you can imagine what it's going to look like, but, you know, you don't see it really as it is until the very end. All right. So that's just a little peek at one of the pieces of the process. I'm curious if anybody has any questions about my process in general. Please feel free to speak up.
Okay. Ken Roseman has a question.
Yeah.
Hey, Ken.
Hi, I'm a music journalist. I don't draw. You know, I was wondering, I mean, the amount of detail and precision that's in your work. You know, when I first saw before the meeting today, you know, Lisa had put up a couple of examples of your mandalas, if that's the right word for them. And it's so intricate. It's so intricate. And then I just, you know, just saw that little video of you there and you actually draw that. I mean, I'd been wondering if it was some kind of, you know, computer program or one thing. And I'm a seething Luddite. I don't even own mobile devices. But, you know, it's just amazing to me the process that you go through and the amount of patience you must have, which I don't.
Yeah. Well, I always like to say that, you know, I do it so other people don't have to. But yeah, I think that's one of the things. I mean, there certainly are moments where I'm doing something so repetitively that, you know, just like I've been like 8 hours in and I'm like, oh man, you know, I was gonna, you know, 50% done. I'm just gonna have to keep on going with this. But, you know, at the same time, there's that beautiful love and the patience with it that you know, I think this is one of the things that is also like a hallmark of finding our peace with life. But there often are these moments where we really, you know, go deep and are, you know, trying to get to a destination. But at the same time, there's this opportunity to really love the process, even if we're not, you know, at the point where we anticipate finding our satisfaction. I love knowing that it's not complete yet, and also at the same time kind of rejoicing in the fact that it's not, because then it's over. So it's always really exciting to get near the end and be at that point where you really can see it taking shape. But at the same time, there's also that just excitement when it's fresh and it's just starting and the planning is happening, or there's something new that comes in, and it's just every part deserves love, and that's how I try to approach life in general.
I do like your use of color. That's best.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like to explain about the very vivid color that I like to use is that this also is an evolution of the process. When I was younger, I really, only worked in black and white. I did a lot of pencil, and there was a time when I was doing my thing, and a friend of mine actually gifted me a set of I guess pens, and I started to work with these colored pens for the first time. They're just like some random stuff that they'd gotten for cheap somewhere, but sort of there was this awakening through the explosion of color that started to make me realize that in itself was a joy, that the kind of the drabness of working only in black and white was something that was actually a symbolic hindrance or resistance to living life in its fullness for me. So I think that's one of the reasons that I love working with color so much, because it's experiencing every dimension of life itself.
Do you ever listen to music while you're working?
I am a music file to the max.
You will have to discuss that offline. I'll have to find you on Facebook or something.
Right.
They're gonna kill me if we have a long music discussion. I know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm brought back to those moments, in the early days of the internet, where you'd have like your, personal website, and there would be like kind of like a little music player playing at the bottom or something. I'm gonna have to add that to my website. Just have a soundtrack to my art.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Next up, we have Madeline Caliendo, who's a board member, SSTCI board member.
Hi, your work is breathtakingly beautiful, and thank you for sharing your story. My question is it a meditative process for you as you're doing the mandalas?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that is one of the most beautiful parts of the process, because I think, given the things that I've really worked through and struggled in the past, a lot of that has had to do with, really being able, struggling to look directly at life, because there was a lot of fear associated with that. And I think one of the most beautiful things about creating art that involves such a meditative process is that it gives me the opportunity to really sit with myself. And I think that is why a lot of people have difficulty, beginning to meditate, formally meditate, because it requires simply being with yourself. And that's hard. We live in this culture of doing, and certainly art is an act of doing to a certain extent. But I've definitely, as much as I've found so much bliss and peace in the process of art, identifying art as a transformational tool, I have really worked through a great deal of darkness internally as I've worked on pieces, and that's one of the things that I enjoy the most, because when I look at the finished piece, there's so much beauty to it. And again, this is really about loving the process, that when we're in that darkness, it feels very ugly, and yet there's this beautiful place that it has in our journey. And so when we look at the full picture, we see that we see the value of every experience that we've had in making us who we are now. So that meditative capacity really is just so crucial to me.
Beautiful. And how long does it take you to do a 16 by 16 piece on average?
So the most recent one that I completed, that was a 16 by 16, and I'll show this during the presentation too, so you can get a sense of it, I spent actually, this was one of the longer ones because it was so complex, but that took me about 6 months. It really, really depends. And one of the things that I always like to mention about the creative process is that reminder that, art never has like a timeline. There's always these bursts where inspiration comes through, and then there can be periods where it stagnates for a while. So always for me, reconnecting to myself is also about reconnecting to the, innate rhythms that are present for my body and my being. So, it's hard, we're encouraged to achieve, and yet sometimes those restful periods also are critical for the process itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Madeline. And up next, we have a question or comment from Chris.
Hi, Summer.
Hey, Chris.
Well, firstly, I just want to say, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so happy that this invitation, found me today, for me to be in attendance today, at this Embracing Our Potential for Transformation, call. I really feel like, I myself am in this space where I really feel like I'm ready to be taking the next step, with my art. And I've been kind of in this I don't know, I've just been listening to everyone's questions that they've said so far, and just your feedback and everything you've said. And it just kind of seems what I was going to ask you, it just seems I was everything that I wanted to hear before that point was I heard. Sorry, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm just trying to say that my question to you was I wanted to know maybe when that I wanted to know more about when you were sharing about transitioning from your art being a release to more of this channeling with more intention for that transformation and growth. I guess I was just when did you maybe feel you had was there a specific piece that marked a really big transition for you? Was there a specific piece that you were doing during that time when you were maybe making the transition to you doing art more regularly, as opposed to it just being something that was more of a release? Sorry, I was trying to find the right words for it, but I guess that's what I'm trying to say is, was there a piece that kind of really marked that transition for you the most, or what was something about that process for you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. It was a good, now kind of get that comprehensive picture of why you're asking the question. Yeah, well, actually, thinking back, one of the kind of biggest experiences of transition for me that I meant to mention but didn't, is that actually one of the significant events that happened for me when I was making kind of that transition was I actually experienced kind of a traumatic injury. But the trauma really came from within for me, because I was moving through really a period where I was grieving a profound loss. And the loss was originally that of a person in my life, but it really began to pull out a lot of other things that had been happening for me on a deeper level, and that ended up manifesting in really, really severe pain. Ultimately, it was tendonitis in both arms, which spoken with holistic practitioners who often say that type of pain is associated with the pain of loss. And so for me, the pain became so bad that, I could no longer work, could no longer drive. And I went through kind of this process of unmaking where I kind of had to build myself up again. But, at the time I had still really identified as a writer, and I was kind of creating art as well. But art with kind of pen and pencil and traditional materials was the only thing that I could really create with. And so that really kind of cemented my path as an artist. But it really was just kind of for me, it was beginning to connect with the world in a way that I hadn't before, that started to coincide with that I started to reach out more to the world and be welcomed by the world. But yeah, I really, to speak to your question though, I can talk about my personal experience of these specific things that speeded my transition. But you know, I always say that if you're feeling it, you know, the hallmark of my art and the message that I seek to give with it and through it is listen, you know, listen to yourself, you know, listen to what's happening for you. Because, you know, the greatest sources of pain for me and the things that have kind of been these enormous knots within my being have been aspects of myself that I've forced into the shadow and not allowed myself to love. And so that the beginning of that process of becoming is very difficult because we're shedding that self-hatred or that unwillingness to love. But it can make really great art. And it always has for me, which isn't to say, you know, you also are absolutely, you know, supported in whatever processes need to happen. But you know,
I was just gonna say in response to that, yeah, like, you know, like dismantling, like, you know, like those illusions and like, you know, like that whole idea of like, you know, like this art as being, you know, like this tool for, you know, transformation, but also like, you know, it is this transmutation to, you know, yeah, like where we are, like, you know, like really like, you know, being able to like transform or, you know, being able to like see, you know, like our experiences, like, you know, like into kind of like to see our experiences like as being like just seeing them in a different light that, you know, like may like allow us to you know, like move forward like in a different way, but just like seeing that like, you know, we can like turn that like pain from our past like, you know, into like something that's like, you know, positive and like, you know, just being like those like alchemists. And yeah, I really like see that present in your work, and like, you know, I really like admire that, and I really you know, like have gotten so much out of just like, you know, like hearing about like, you know, your process, and you know, yeah, it's inspiring, you know. Thank you for sharing.
oh, thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. We also have a question from artist Cynthia Farrell Johnson, who is on the call here.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hello. Your work is just stunning, and it also is wonderful to just look at it and take it in because it has a very calming effect. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. I wanted to ask you more about materials you use. Do you paint? I mean, do you do your drawings on watercolor paper or other papers? Do you do mixed media work? I was just curious about the different ways you express yourself.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I've always like identified myself as a mixed media artist, but you know, for the majority of my process, it really is just working. The only kind of paper that I use is watercolor paper. It's heavy, 140 pound. And so like I create my work on that watercolor paper. But actually, let me bring up my first image so that we can have some reference for this. So bear with me, Cynthia. Okay. Back here. So I'm gonna scroll. And I'll talk as it's loading. So really, when it comes to my materials, I do primarily use the pen. Let's see, where was I going with this? But so what you see here is an image that I've created on watercolor paper. What is maybe a little bit more difficult to see is actually the sort of the dark space that surrounds it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Obviously this is a scan, but you can actually see, I don't know if the detail is good enough for everybody, but on the edges of kind of the petals, the watercolor paper has actually been cut out. So the mandala is, you know, itself on a piece of paper that I work on with the watercolor and pen. But behind that, I end up like matting or backing my images with what's essentially like a black glitter paper. And this is something that you really can only see and understand in person, but I'll bring out a little piece of it just so that people can see. Let me go back a bit. Let's see. So here is actually the paper that I use. Oops. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
So this Yeah, so this really is, when I discovered this, it really, I don't know, there was something about it that significantly made a difference in my creative process, because when I work with the black glitter paper, it may just seem like an aesthetic accompaniment, but the intention here really is to kind of frame the piece itself with, for me, what really represents kind of the fertility of the cosmos, because the glitter really is that contrast between the nothingness of space and yet also this abundance of stars and light. So it's that polarity that kind of unites the central image almost as one single image in focus of the infinite, endless infinite expanse of life and existence. I don't know, I kind of focused on the glitter paper. I'm happy to answer more questions on the pen and watercolor. Generally, I'll turn back real quick to the other screen, just to explain a little bit, because I generally have worked with pen, and that's kind of my comfort zone. But one of the other things that I've been enjoying lately is kind of embracing the complexity of watercolor as an accompaniment to the kind of straight edginess of the pen. So I'll scroll down here a whole bunch. So this is, here we go. So this is a piece that I completed recently. This is called Night Mother, but you can see that there's a variety of materials I use here. A lot of the color work is done with the pens, but also you can see that the skin tone is watercolor. I occasionally use paint pens. You can see that in kind of like the light falling on the horns, and the kind of the energetic patterns that are on the inside of the hood that are that kind of bright yellow color are actually gel pen. And I think this is one of the most fun parts, because, just really getting the opportunity to be playful with different materials and things like that gives you this, this multifaceted look. So that's where I am currently with my process. Back to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
thank you so much, Cynthia.
Yeah, Cynthia is a wonderful artist as well. I was mentioning her work to you, which is reminiscent of your work, in that your work both of your work is conducive to coloring books, and Cynthia has a wonderful coloring book. And yeah, she also has a love of vibrant colors, and yeah, so I highly recommend checking out Cynthia's work. Thank you so much. Always good to see you, Cynthia.
Yeah, I hope
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Lisa, you'll have to
Yeah.
connect us.
Yes, I'll send an email connecting you both. And we have a wonderful poet in our midst who has a question for you. Catrice, are you here? Here we go. Here she is.
I am. Hi, how are you? Summer, I'm going to remain off camera, but it's really
Okay.
great to meet you. I'm from Baltimore too, so that was exciting to read about you, and your work is quite beautiful. Um, there are a few things that are in my head, but I wanted to ask, your work has a frequency to me,
Mhm.
and I was wondering, you're almost like kind of like you're plotting latitude and longitude, but literally in the spiritual celestial realm. That's what your work looks like to me. It's so highly spiritual and exacting. Do you, when you are working, feel or hear a resonant frequency when you create? Because your work does give off a frequency, at least for me. I was wondering if you feel it when you create.
Oh, thank you for that question. Yeah. So my answer kind of always, surprises me as well. So actually, my experience is that a lot of what's happening for me is coming from a place that is so deep within me or beyond me, that, you know, I often feel as though, you know, I am the channel, or maybe the end of the channel, or the kind of the boundary between, or door between what's coming through that is beyond me, and what is, you know, actually manifesting into, you know, the creation of the art. So, you know, I'm often asked if my pieces come from, you know, visual visions that I have. And the answer to that is actually no. There's no kind of like precognizance of what's coming forth. But I do definitely, when I'm looking at my work and kind of like seeing it from a witness's perspective, there is, you know, I can feel the energy that's happening there. I've actually had an experience with Kundalini energy, and so it's very subtle, but there's definitely this sense, you know, that there's something that's manifested through the art, and that's an experience that I really enjoy when I take a moment to step aside and look at it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. And earlier, when you mentioned a journey of healing and how certain things with the grieving manifested physically, I know I just watered that down, but I just
Valuable
wanted to say I
reflections.
really appreciate, thanks for that word, reflection. I really appreciated that reflection because I can certainly, um, that resonates for me. I'm a poet, but I also sketch, I paint, and I'm a photographer, and I do a couple of things. So for me, expression is very important, and I don't meet a lot of people who it shows up in their bodies and they're aware of it. I lost the use of my right arm last year for a full year.
Mm.
Um, so I wasn't able to do a lot. And we all are impacted in different ways due to grieving or things we're going through. I just wanted to thank you for being that transparent and for sharing. It resonates, and that is a generosity. Um, it's such a beautiful thing you did to share. So thank you very much, and I wish you well. Thank you for answering the question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think especially, you know, as humans have moved through our, you know, relationship with social media, and even before that, you know, there's this feeling that, you know, we're very isolated in our own experiences, even as we're sharing them so avidly. And I feel like, you know, I can't be a good artist if I'm not authentic about my experiences. So I always think there's a, you know, level of you know, personal distance that we need to keep, you know, for ourselves to set appropriate boundaries. But you know, it really means a lot to know that it's received with compassion, that my story is received with compassion and gratitude, because, you know, it's shared out of a desire to deepen compassion. And to remind others that their experiences are valid, that their pain is valid. So thank you for your words.
Great. Thank you, Catrice. There's some questions in the chat for you as well, if you want to look at those or continue on. Summer?
Sure. So actually, what I'm going to do, it's hard for me to access the chat messages through
Okay.
my iPad. So I'm going to thank everyone for posing them. I'm going to hold those until the end because I do want to move through some of my work, because I think it actually really connects to some of the questions that have been asked. So let's do that for a little bit, and then we can return back to people's questions. All right, so I've talked about process. I'm going to talk a little bit more on the topic of sacred geometry, because this is actually something else that informs my work. So one of the patterning forms that is incorporated into my art is related to something called sacred geometry. And again, this is a concept that's very hard to put into words, but essentially, you know, sacred geometry represents the structure and form that life takes. It's really the mathematics of life, because when we really look very closely at life, there are these repetitive patterns and ways of ordering itself that life takes. So it's really the connection between, you know, what some call the divine, and the manifestation of that. And so I'm going to share with you, start by looking at a little bit of my work, especially the ones that relate to sacred geometry. And you can kind of see an example of how that plays into the forms that I create. But I love it because, you know, it forms, one of the beautiful parts or aspects of working with sacred geometry is that looking even at sacred geometry, because it's kind of that connection between the logical and the intuitive, is that it unites the hemispheres in the brain. And that really just looking at that has the capacity to kind of fill, you know, our senses with this experience of just peace, because there's this beautiful balance to it. Right, so let's move back a little bit. So working on this. Okay. So this is one of the first pieces that I created that incorporates sacred geometry. It's called Collective Consciousness. And again, this kind of plays on the theme of the nature of sacred geometry, in that, you know, as I mentioned, life has the tendency to form in certain patterns. And, you know, this one is essentially like an expansion of what's called the flower of life. And the flower of life in itself is kind of often can be seen as a metaphor for how life, you know, forms at the very beginning. So, you know, in the process of conception for many animals, at the very least, you know, the egg is fertilized. And when that occurs, the process of cell division begins. And you actually can see in the very middle of this piece, it's kind of hard to describe, you know, without kind of having reference materials. But you know, first there's the first one cell, it then splits into two, the two split into four into eight. This also, I think, is the golden ratio, if I'm remembering correctly, of adding the last one, or no, actually I'm missaying that. But still, the idea of this division into these infinite cells, really, that is the proliferation of life. And within each expression of life, there is an awareness. And that's really what I wanted to convey in this piece, is that experience of unity, the reality of unity, and yet at the same time, the individuation of all of these, you know, quote unquote separate parts. And so this for me was a really beautiful way to convey that in just the fullness and color of this piece. This one is another exploration into sacred geometry that I worked on. So this symbol right here is known as the Sri Yantra. And it is a very beautiful and powerful archetypal symbol that originated, at least in the area of India, as far as I understand it. But really, this Sri Yantra is thought to essentially be representative of the universe. It's also a powerful tool for manifestation, for transformation. And so, you know, it really is a very powerful thing. But what I really enjoyed about this is that I had the opportunity to really work with sacred geometry in very complex ways. So what I wish I had a picture of is the formation of this piece, but essentially by using a series of circles, I was able, by joining various points together, to form these, I forget how many there are, something like 64 interlocking triangles that are present in the center, as well as build the rest of it. So, you know, kind of using these very, you know, timeless blueprints, working with sacred geometry is this beautiful exercise in creating art that is in itself unique, and yet it has within it these universal patterns that are present throughout life, throughout the universe. So I'm now going to move on to some more pieces in my body of work. ones I'm going to start with actually are the chakra series that I worked on between 2016 and 2017. And this was a really beautiful process for me because, you know, my work is deeply introspective, and this gave me the opportunity to really work with, you know, the chakras, which appear in various cultures throughout the world, really symbolize different energy centers in the body. Each one corresponds to a different aspect of self, and sort of the journey through the experience of self into the journey of oneness with all. So we start with the root chakra, which really, you know, is associated with some of our most basic individual needs, you know, physical needs like shelter, food, you know, essential safety. And for me, obviously, you know, coming from a place where, you know, I wasn't comfortable with my body, wasn't familiar with how to, you know, treat it with respect and love. The root chakra is, you know, very basic and beautiful foundation to kind of start building a more joyful life, because, you know, it's focusing on the most essential things that we lack. And, you know, you can see here that in the kind of the middle of the piece, there's these kind of like bricks underneath the eye. And that idea, again, is building this foundation for life. You know, I think we often try to do too much too quickly. And, you know, the reminder is always to ground ourselves, to stay present with, you know, all of the, just make sure that all of our needs are taken care of from the ground up. So I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly because I am surprised at how much time has already passed. The sacral chakra is the chakra that really corresponds to the womb space, both in male and female bodied individuals. And this really is located in that center of creation. And really, you know, this is such a beautiful expression of our innate capacity to create, you know, no matter what identity we experience, there is a part of us that, you know, I hear so many people say that they're not creative. And for me, the truth is really that every person creates in their own way, and it doesn't have to be recognized as art for us to be creative problem solvers, to be, you know, to think our way creatively through life. So I always love the chakra as a reminder that we have that capacity. So the solar plexus chakra is the chakra that corresponds, among other things, to our ability to experience empowerment within ourselves, you know, our ability to have confidence in ourselves and to really manifest, you know, through our uniqueness. And so this one, I believe the solar plexus chakra, also Manipura is the Sanskrit word. And I think it corresponds to like jewel palace or something. And, you know, this one I really do think is this portal through which we have the ability to begin connecting to our truest path, because it means that we trust in ourselves. And the fact that our experiences are valid and that our journey is valid, you know, whatever that may be. So moving on to the heart chakra, this one is, you know, no pun intended, very dear to my heart. We have the two doves with rainbow wings right above the kind of, it's like an elk-like animal that is often associated with the heart chakra. But there's this idea that the gentleness of, you know, our hearts, and the idea that, you know, living from the heart often is seen as maybe something that can be more challenging because it's very hard to open fully to life. But for me, the chakra in the seven chakra series, the heart chakra is the central one. And for me, it's the uniting one, because even as the higher chakras have their value, the heart chakra is at the center of self and other, or self and all, and has the potential for integration of all things. So I loved experiencing this one and creating this one so very much. The third chakra always is a beautiful one to meditate on, because, you know, our throats are the place from which our voices originate. And, you know, I've had struggles with, you know, working through throat chakra issues for so much of my life, of, just going through the experience of feeling that I have the ability to have a voice in the world, and, that it's okay and permissible for me to speak my truths. And often also in terms of creative blockages, trusting that, I can allow something to come through, or I can have patience for it to come through. Because the element associated with the throat chakra is water. And so it's being in tune with that flow, and, allowing it instead of stopping it up, but also knowing that there are periods of rest and there are periods of activity. So I really always love working on this one. There's like a water wheel at the very center. And I love that idea of kind of churning the water and kind of like steering our direction in life through how we communicate and how we create. So second to last, we have the third eye chakra. And this one, the third eye is located between the eyebrows above the two eyes, and, often is seen as this conduit for deep inner truth, and for really visioning and seeing beyond the illusions that often kind of serve as a curtain between us and what's really happening. And I love this one so much because there's such a radiance to the way in which it emanates the light, that there's so much energy and power that radiates from being willing to look at difficult truths, and really, I think, gazing into those depths and being with that curiosity is such a meaningful journey to begin to undertake. And finally, we reach the crown chakra, which is really like the portal to the allness of being. For this one, I really wanted to connect that back to, the earth herself, because, part of my healing journey has been reconnecting to the earth, and almost all humans have this very fragmented relationship with the world that has really given birth to us. And I think that, in regaining that connection, with the living world, with the world that, sustains and supports us, there's the capacity to, again, open our hearts and reintegrate ourselves with all things. So even as much as the chakras touch on spiritual themes that may seem beyond us, I also often feel that our connection with oneness is one that happens right here, right now, in the physical world, exactly as we experience it. So I really wanted to bring that realness and that full spectrum of color that exists for our eyes now into this piece. So next, I'm going to present a little bit. I'm going to skip past a few pieces, but I wanted to talk about Alchemista, because this is something that actually I was thinking of as I was answering a question, just talking about the process of transformation, which for me, just it is really difficult sometimes. So when I created Alchemista, I was going through a number of challenges in my own life that were very, very difficult to move through. And so one of the things that I just love reading about and learning about and practicing is the process of spiritual alchemy. And for me, what spiritual alchemy constitutes is it's essentially the metaphorical representation of conventional alchemy. And the kind of the hallmark example of that is this legend of alchemists converting lead into gold. But really, that's kind of a symbolic representation of, doing the unthinkable. It's like, how do you convert this kind of base matter into this, pure, ineffably beautiful, radiant substance. And so spiritual alchemy mirrors that, in that the process of spiritual alchemy is essentially, to put it concisely, really, it's a fierce process of self-examination that it really involves looking very deeply into who we are, and starting to discern what is ready to be released, that is no longer resonant with the process and the being that we're becoming. And so there's this idea here with the winged figure of ascension, of rising beyond that, with love and compassion, and kind of balancing the process of releasing kind of the former substance of self, and kind of experiencing this so-called purification that occurs when that has been let go.
Summer,
Yes.
sorry, Summer. We're not seeing your
Oh
screen.
no!
So
Has it been present at all?
yes, until like the last, like, since you started talking about this subject, I believe.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh, I see
people
that
are
the
writing in
screen
the
sharing
chat,
session.
so yeah.
Thank you for letting me know.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try this again. Just let me know when you can actually see it. Oh, and I'll also flip back really quick to the crown chakra so people can see that one. Is it showing up for you? Can you see the
Yes,
image
we can
here?
see it now.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Okay. So here is the crown chakra. And I'm going to move down to Alchemista here. So this is the image that I was talking about that for me was very emblematic of the process of spiritual alchemy. And yeah, this one really incorporates so many elements of just the triumph that can occur when we go through this releasing and surrendering process. One of the things that, always speaks to me that can be very easy to forget is, often when we're changing as a person, when we're going through maybe this releasing process, and of course, that might involve resistance anyway. It's change is a thing that, is so understandably feared, because when we move through a loss, death is painful. But often, my experience with difficult change, there's this instinctive association or belief that the loss is permanent, or that, nothing can ever adequately fill it again. Just thoughts like this of just, how can I surpass or transcend, this difficult process? But one of the most beautiful things for me in experiencing kind of a death of a former self, or a death of something that no longer is remembering that, that empty space is an opportunity for creation to occur again. So, even in physical birth, the child leaves the womb, and that space becomes ready again to hold life. And I think symbolically, that's so true of every human, that even if something leaves our life, we can fill it, or life fills it with something else. And, the hardest thing is to trust that, we have the capacity to love and find joy in what next comes. But for me, always that trusting process is the journey, that journey into deeper trust. So this piece is called Her Greatest Gift. I think this was the header in some of the material for this presentation. This really is one of my favorite pieces. And the inspiration for this piece, this was actually created a few months after kind of everything with COVID had begun. And as we all know, it really, has been such a time of incredible division amongst us humans. It's been very hard, and not just isolating for obvious reasons, but there's been so much separation between us. And so this piece is named Her Greatest Gift because the woman in the center is a representation of Mother Earth, or Pachamama. And what I wanted to convey here is the deep feeling that I have of really one of the most powerful aspects of Earth herself is the fact that she creates out of love. And so the idea here is that, her greatest gift really is the lesson that, compassion coming together, regardless of difference, in ways that in which we honor each other, and allow for our diversity and unique gifts and ways of being. That's how life proliferates on this planet. The more homogenous things are, the less effective life is. So in this piece, I really wanted to highlight, the role that each expression of life has in the great web of being, and call back that interconnectedness that is innate to life and to Earth, is an act of love, of the fact that everything is connected and interdependent, and that's the beauty in it. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit about this piece and then skip forward because I know that we're very short on time at this point. So this piece is called Gatekeeper. This is actually one of my favorite pieces. There's just an abundance to it that I really love. But the figure here, you can see that there are a number of elements that relate to ancient Egypt here. The central figure is a representation of Ma'at, who is an Egyptian goddess of justice and balance. You can see in her two hands, she's clutching the scales that contain a heart and a feather. And in the ancient Egyptian mythos, the idea was that, when a person had died, they would come and kind of have their life be evaluated to see, what was it like? Are they worthy of passing into this particular realm? And so if the heart was as light as a feather, they would be permitted to pass. So I really like that metaphor, but the idea here, is of this innate wisdom and discernment, and the idea of these deep lineages. For here, it's the matrilineal line, really the idea of reconnection to, all of these traditions that many of us have lost along the way, of experiences of visioning and connecting deeply inwards, and really having the portal of emergence and manifestation deepen as a result of that. So I'm going to move past a few of these. Although you're welcome to visit my website after and check them out. I have all kinds of stuff on the interwebs. So this is the piece that I wanted to mention that I think Cynthia, if I'm remembering correctly, had asked about how long it takes for me to create a piece. So this is the piece of mine that took approximately 6 months to create. And this one I finished last year. And one of the things that I really love about this piece, it's called Within This Infinite Moment. And what I really enjoy is the complexity of it, and also the balance. And for me, I'll zoom in a little bit more. And again, let me know if anything disappears. But what's being pictured here is really just the immensity and complexity of the present moment. And often it does feel like a chaos, that there's just so much happening and it's all happening at once, and it's impossible to decipher, and all this, and but then at the same time, often our minds are turning toward the past and the future, and that's really what causes so much of the suffering. It's this experience of comparison, and hoping that things will be a certain way, or regretting that they were a different way, when really, in the experience of being present with this moment, we can really tune into the grace and the beauty of this really being all that there is, and yet it's complete in its endlessness. So I really wanted to represent that here with, really the water flowing and kind of the proverbial phoenix rising from, this moment, being, dying while at the same time being born into the next. And so finally, this is the piece that I showed a little bit earlier. This piece I just completed about a week and a half ago. And this one's just been such a joy because I've been able to really focus on my watercolor technique and add some complexity and dimensionality to my pieces. But this one really has been about death for me. Last year, I experienced some a very difficult loss again in my life. And it was very difficult to navigate. But as I moved through that loss, I also began to move through the process of really letting go of a lot of aspects of myself that really no longer served me. And again, as I talked about before, the process of kind of dying can be very frightening. And yet there is the recognition that life and death really are sides of the same coin. And as we die, we are born. And so just calling in sort of these very powerful elements of, recognizing that this is like a fundamental process of the earth, that in order for new things to live, old things have to die, and really respecting the beauty of that process. So I'm gonna wrap up with some Q&A. I'm gonna leave this up after people finish with any questions you might have. But I will show you this real quick. I do want to thank everyone, including anyone who has to leave. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation talk thing. If you want to learn more about me, if you'd like to explore the workshop offerings that I have, connect with me on social media, please visit my website, check out my social media, send me an email. I'm happy to connect. And yeah, it's just been such a joy. So I'm gonna end with that and turn back to unsharing my screen. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out now.
Thank you so much, Summer. Such beautiful and inspiring and thought-provoking work. I know we had some questions in the chat. I see Ken has his hand up. He also had a couple questions in the chat. Ken, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah. I definitely want to keep in touch with you about the music thing. Can I find you on Facebook under your own name? And secondly, I don't know how to put this. I hope, it's not weird. This is your vehicle of expression, the mandalas. I mean, isn't that basically from Indian as in India culture? Did you grow up with that, or is it just something you were naturally attracted to? Don't know how else to put that.
You were asking about the mandalas, like where the inspiration or influence came from?
Yeah, I mean, you don't look Indian. Yeah, is it something you grew up with? Is it something you were naturally attracted to? Were you involved with Indian culture? I mean, I'm Jewish, but I very global in my cultural tastes these days. So
yeah, well, actually, my image of myself is frozen, so hopefully people can still hear and see me.
Yes, you're moving and we can hear you well.
yeah,
Okay, excellent.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Ken. Go ahead.
Yes. So really, I guess I'll first start by answering that the mandala, I like, there's a lot of presence within Indian culture of the mandala. The mandala actually is present in essentially all world cultures. It's something that I think is innate to humanity. That being said, as I've spent years of my life kind of exploring culture, there definitely have been aspects of spirituality during my exploration that have connected to like Indian themes, like things from that particular area of the world. I think in some ways I'm a very stereotypical Westerner in that, when yoga came to the Western world, we all got some exposure to stuff that came from, India, particularly the yogic tradition. But for me, the mandala finds its way into expression through various world cultures. So it's definitely been something that's encompassed so many sources of art that I've looked at and been inspired by. But yeah, thank you for the question. Does anybody else have a question?
Great. Jeremy, I have a question.
Hi, Summer.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you ever have trouble like reliably keeping the door of creativity open, and like what you do to get past any like stuck creativity.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because I think everyone who enjoys creating comes to points where it's just like it's not coming through right now, like please come back. I want to experience you again. But no, for me, I mean, I struggle with creative block all the time. And it's a grappling with for me because there's been a part of myself for a very long time that's just like, you've got to produce, you've got to demonstrate your worth by creating. So there's a part of it that really, has wanted to push through creative blocks. But as time passes more recently, it's become more of an exploration into really respecting the need for rest and to really create the balance that exists between creating and not creating. That being said, one of the suggestions I do have for somebody who might just be stuck and needs to kind of build the momentum up again is I really try to switch up what I do. So I actually was at a festival this weekend and I started working on a piece, and it honestly got so technical for me that my inspiration well dried up. And I was like, all right, I'm done. I don't want to make anything else. I don't know what to make. I don't feel inspired at all. So I ended up pulling out another piece that, I had previously worked on to really start, kind of pursuing that again. So that's one thing that happened for me, just kind of switching back and forth. But I always recommend switching mediums. So, whatever you have a tendency towards, so maybe you want to make some visual art, but you've got like a keyboard in your apartment, and you just, whether or not you're talented enough, you start playing with that. I always feel that creativity sometimes needs to move through different forms, and especially when we're trying to do something that's technical or advanced, it can be nice to return to a state of play. So I always recommend that, because I think just returning to that place of flexibility where it's like, okay, I'm comfortable again, takes us out of our heads and back into the flow state.
Excellent,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I think that about does it for our questions, even though I know there are more out there. People had asked some in the chat, but I want to be respectful of your time. It's been such a wonderful journey with you, Summer, exploring your beautiful, mesmerizing work, really. I know the process, mandalas, the whole notion of them is to cause focus and meditate on them, and whether you're creating them or just looking at them. And I found myself just kind of drifting off, and the places you will go. That's why I invited you during the month of August, because you don't just travel to places on the earth, you travel beyond yourself, as you so poignantly explained throughout this presentation. And I know everyone really loved it, and we hope to have you join us for some teaching workshops and more. We're just so enamored with your work. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work with us. It's been a wonderful time.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I do encourage everybody, it seems like there were a number of more questions. Please feel free to reach out. You can send me a DM on Instagram, reach out through email. Again, Instagram is Art of Summer Blake. You can find my email through my website, summerblake.com. Thank you so much, Brian, for coming out. Please connect with me. It's my joy to encourage others to transformation and self-expression. So, thank you all. Thank you, Patrice. And I hope to do this again at some point soon.